My parents have always favored my sister Sarah. Now, given a second chance at life, I'm done competing. Sarah wants my scholarship to Stanford? She can have it. Sarah wants my research project? It's hers. Sarah wants my boyfriend Jason? He's all yours, sis. This time around, I just want a peaceful life, focused on myself. Being me? I don't regret it one bit. 1 inch Ashley, you know about your sister's health. She can't pull all-nighters studying like you. She can't get into a good college through the regular admissions process. So about that scholarship, Dad's voice cracked. Mom glared at me, silently urging him on. He finally choked out the rest of the sentence. Could you, give it to Sarah? It sounded like a question, but it was a command, delivered without a shred of guilt. I stared at my dad, his hair not yet gray, the memory of falling from that building flashing before my eyes. It took a moment to realize I was reborn. Back to 17, back to a time when I could change everything. Mom's face hardened when I didn't respond immediately. Ashley, she scolded, you're smart and capable, unlike your sister. Whether you want to or not, you have to give her the scholarship. Last time, Mom said the exact same thing. I was furious, refusing to give up what I'd earned. But in the end, the scholarship was already Sarah's, thanks to my parents' maneuvering. They didn't even tell me it was a done deal, letting me goof off for months, missing the regular application deadlines entirely. My dream school slipped away. When I confronted them, do you know what they said? They said, just take a gap year, what's the big deal? One dismissive sentence cost me another year of grueling study. I finally got into college, only to face another crisis. Sarah was failing and about to be expelled. My parents wanted me to hand over my research project to save her. I refused. They pulled strings, flashed cash. I cried, I screamed. But I ended up with insufficient credits, expelled. Back then, I didn't understand that things you can give away weren't truly yours to begin with. The scholarship, the research project. But the things that are yours, you can't give away, no matter how hard you try. Like my knowledge, the information etched in my brain. I met my parents' gaze. Okay, I said steadily. I'll give it to her. Mom's eyebrows shot up, surprised by my easy surrender. Dad let out a relieved sigh. Ashley, we're so proud of you for being so understanding. He handed me a gift, the Lego Star Destroyer I'd always wanted. Huge, enough to fill my room. Last time, that Star Destroyer was in Sarah's room. 2, I went through the motions. School, homework, reviewing material I already knew by heart. When I got tired, I'd work on the Lego set. Some weekends, I'd spend hours on a single section. Finally, 6 months later, the Star Destroyer was complete. I barely had time to admire it before Sarah shattered it. She discovered the finished model in my room and invited her friends over to see it. Wanting to show it off, she tried to carry the massive thing to the living room, despite her supposed fragility. It crashed to the floor, a plastic explosion. She scraped her forehead in the process. Tears streaming, she apologized, promised she'd put it back together. Okay, I said. She started gathering the pieces. Some scratched her feet, others hid in crevices, covering her in dust. Mom saw her disheveled state and pointed a finger at me. It's just a toy, Ashley. Does your sister have to crawl around like a dog looking for pieces? Can't you show some consideration for her health? She seemed to have forgotten that Sarah offered to fix it. She also forgot that I'd spent months crawling around like a dog to build it in the first place. But it didn't matter. I'd never expected anything from Mom. No expectations, no disappointments. I looked at Sarah, tears still welling in her eyes. I do understand you're delicate, I said. So, don't bother. Sarah shook her head, body trembling. No, I broke it. I have to fix it. I couldn't help but let out a small, bitter laugh. But if you're hurt, Mom and Dad will be upset. They'll think I was being inconsiderate, that I was bullying you. Sarah, do you want to help me or do you want me to get yelled at? Sarah froze. Mom too. I spoke calmly. This SAR destroyer, it wasn't really mine, was it? I took it, Sarah's toy. That's why she tried to move it without asking. I was being selfish. Dad was just being nice, and I took something that wasn't mine. Mom, Sarah, don't worry, it won't happen again. I'll know my place from now on. Mom and Sarah were speechless, mouths open slightly, unable to form words. I didn't want to waste any more time. I went back to my desk, put on my headphones, listened to English lessons. The sounds filled my mind, blocking everything else out. All that mattered was studying. I could buy my own Legos later. 3. The SATs arrived. I scored a solid 1,500, no sweat. My parents, seeing my score, suggested I apply to the same college as Sarah. The implication was clear. They wanted me to help her graduate. Last time, I fought them. It was pointless. Even though I guarded my application like a hawk, they managed to change my choice at the last minute. Dad was a software engineer. I was no match for him in that arena. So this time, I agreed. I wasn't strong enough to fight. Dad, perhaps feeling a twinge of guilt, gave me a debit card, $3,000. He told me not to tell Mom or Sarah to buy something nice for myself. But Dad, fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice. Freshman year, winter break. Sarah had already blown through her travel money. I changed my train ticket to a standing room only car, figuring we'd travel home together. Sarah refused. She hated the smell, the crowds. She stayed on campus, lied to our parents, claiming her professor had asked her to stay for a special project. My high and mighty sister. No skills, all ego. She didn't want our parents to think she was useless and irresponsible. She didn't want her friends to know she was broke. So she pretended, and her charade ended up punishing me. She spent 5 days washing dishes at a diner, earning enough for a train ticket home. But those 5 days cost her the chance to buy a ticket during peak booking season. By the time she realized it was New Year's Eve, she called home, sobbing, "It's so cold." They turned off the heat and water in the dorms. "Mom, Dad, I'm scared." My parents finally understood. They called me, demanding an explanation. I told them the truth. This time, Dad exploded. He slapped me across the face, 5 fingers imprinted on my cheek, the pain blurring my vision. Even Mom was shocked. He raised his hand again, but Mom stopped him. "What are you doing?" she cried. "Sarah's always been sensitive," Dad yelled. Ashley knew that. She bought her a standing room only ticket on purpose. She wanted her to stay behind. "That's your sister. Why couldn't you just buy her a proper ticket?" I gave a weak smile. If I bought her a ticket, I couldn't come home myself. "I gave you $3,000 for emergencies," he roared. "How could you not have enough?" I looked at Mom. Her face was grim. As Dad continued ranting, she finally spoke. "Ashley gave me that money," she said quietly. She didn't have any left." Dad's jaw dropped. He'd already hit me, yelled at me. He couldn't back down now. His next words were less confident. "Even without that money, she gets $250 a month for expenses. A train ticket is only a few $100s. She's just being spiteful. She didn't want her sister to come home." I didn't answer, just kept looking at Mom, a small smile playing on my lips. Mom sighed. "Enough," she said, even quieter. "Ashley didn't have the money for... How could she not have the money? She gets $250 a month. A train ticket is only a few $100s. No, Ashley doesn't get that much. Are you senile? Both girls get $250 a month. No, Ashley gets $1.50. Yes, my monthly allowance was $1.50, this life and the last. The difference was, last time, Mom forced it on me. This time, I asked for it. Back in September, I'd given Mom Dad's $3,000. Sarah's health is delicate, I'd said. She probably needs more money than me. I can manage on $50 a month. Give the rest to Sarah. Mom was surprised, but she'd readily agreed, praising my maturity. After all, she didn't have to come up with another excuse to berate me and take my money for Sarah. A train ticket home cost $1,500. I'd saved for a whole semester just to get home. But in the end, I was the only one who made it. Home to Sarah's home. This wasn't my home. Mom stared at the floor, avoiding my gaze. Dad's lips were pressed into a thin line. He knew he was wrong, but he wouldn't apologize. In this family, only outsiders needed to apologize. I looked at Dad, still smiling. "I'm sorry, Dad," I said. "Next time this happens, I'll give Sarah all my money for her ticket, because whether I came home or not, no one cared." I turned to go to my room. "Ashley," Mom said, her voice laced with blame. "If you told us about Sarah sooner, your father wouldn't have misunderstood. You wouldn't have been hit. This is your own fault. You can't blame your father or your sister or me." I stopped. A bitter taste filled my throat, just as I expected. But thankfully, I was prepared. I turned back, pulled out my phone, played a recording from a few days earlier. My voice, clear and crisp, filled the room. "Mom, Dad, Sarah's stuck because she doesn't have money for a ticket, not because of some project. Tickets are selling out fast. You should buy her one now, or she might not get home at all." Then, my parents' mocking laughter, Mom's voice. "Honestly, Ashley, are you jealous of your sister? Are you envious that she's working on a project?" Dad's voice. "Sarah just sent me a picture of her holding her train ticket. Stop making trouble. Why don't you spend more time studying so you can get picked for a project yourself?" Then, they'd spent several minutes praising Sarah. Even when I tried to speak, they cut me off, accusing me of having ulterior motives. The recording ended. My parents were pale, their lips trembling. They had nothing to say, no way to shift the blame onto me. I went to my room, curled up under the covers. In the middle of the night, I heard the rumble of suitcases. My parents tiptoed out the door. When I woke up, there was a note from Mom on the table. "Ashley, Dad, and I had to go out of town. Take care of yourself." I stared at the note, then opened the empty fridge, a chill settling in my stomach. This was going to be a long few days. I knew where they were going. Tickets from home were easy to get. They showed up at Sarah's dorm the next morning with a cake, a surprise visit. Sarah posted it all on Instagram. Not my birthday, she wrote, but any excuse for cake with a fam. "Happy New Year. Strawberry cake, Sarah's favorite, mine too. But I wouldn't be getting any this year. It didn't matter, I could buy my own later." 5. Sophomore year. Sarah was failing so many classes, she was facing expulsion. My parents rushed to the college pulling strings. They learned that a research project could save her, guarantee her graduation. And I had a research project. Their eyes turned to me once again. "Ashley," Dad said, all pretense of guilt gone. "Your sister needs this project to graduate. You should let her have it." Mom said nothing, her eyes devoid of any warmth. Ever since I played that recording, exposed their hypocrisy, they dropped the act. It was better this way. No more moral posturing. No more being cast as the villain. They were finally being honest. Their favoritism towards Sarah was the real evil all along. Now their demands were blunt. Just like the fact that I hadn't received a phone call, a visit, or a dime of allowance in over a year. "Okay," I said, "Sarah can have the project." I handed over the completed research paper. My parents gave it straight to Sarah. That night, another Instagram post, another picture of Sarah with Mom and Dad. After handing over my research project to Sarah without a fight, I watched my parents' relief wash over them like a tide. Their faces softening as if I'd finally done something right by them, something worthy of their approval, though I knew it wasn't about me. It never was. Sarah posted that Instagram picture with Mom and Dad, beaming over my work as if it were hers, and I scrolled past it on my phone, feeling nothing but a dull ache where anger used to live, a hollow space I'd carved out for myself in this second chance at life. Sophomore year rolled on, and I kept my head down, focusing on my studies with a quiet determination that felt more like survival than ambition. Every grade I earned, every note I took, was a brick in the wall I was building around myself, a fortress against their expectations. My parents didn't call, didn't visit, didn't send money, and I didn't ask. I'd learned to stretch my meager savings from odd jobs, tutoring, freelance editing, a weekend gig at a coffee shop, into enough to cover rent, ramen, and the occasional secondhand textbook. The $1.50 allowance I'd asked for back in September had been a symbolic surrender, a way to strip their control down to its absurd core, and now I lived on my terms, however lean they were. Meanwhile, Sarah coasted through her classes on the back of my research project, her expulsion threat fading into a distant memory as Mom and Dad bragged to their friends about our brilliant girls, lumping me into the praise like an afterthought, though I knew they hadn't checked my grades or even asked how I was managing. One chilly afternoon in March, I was holed up in the library, poring over a physics textbook, when my phone buzzed with a text from Jason, my boyfriend from before the accident, the one I'd let Sarah have in this reborn life without so much as a backward glance. "Hey Ash, can we talk?" it read, and I stared at the screen, my stomach twisting with a mix of curiosity and dread, wondering what he could possibly want after months of silence. I'd seen him with Sarah around campus, their hands intertwined, her laughter loud and performative, and I'd walked the other way every time, telling myself I didn't care, that I was done with that part of my past. But now, here he was, reaching out, and I couldn't help but wonder if Sarah had pushed him away too, if her selfishness had finally worn through his patience. I agreed to meet him at a quiet diner off campus, slipping into a booth across from him, his familiar brown eyes searching mine with an intensity that made me shift uncomfortably. "I miss you," he said, cutting straight to it, his voice low and earnest. She's not you, Ash. She's loud and needy, and I thought it'd be fine, but it's not. I messed up letting you go." I sipped my coffee, letting the bitterness ground me, and thought about how I'd once fought for him, how I'd begged him to see me when Sarah started flirting, how I'd lost that battle too. But this time, I'd walked away first, and it felt different. "Jason, I gave her everything," I said, my tone flat. "The scholarship, the project, you. I'm not taking anything back. I'm done competing." He frowned, leaning closer. "But you don't have to compete. You're better than her. You always were. I see that now." I almost laughed. A sharp, brittle sound, because it was too late for him to see anything, too late for it to matter. I'd rebuilt myself from the ground up in this life, piece by painstaking piece, and I wasn't about to let anyone, not Jason, not Sarah, not my parents, drag me back into their orbit. Still, his words lingered, stirring something I thought I'd buried, a flicker of what could have been if I'd fought harder last time, if I hadn't fallen from that building and woken up at 17 with a chance to rewrite it all. I left the diner without promising him anything, telling him I needed time, but as I walked back to my cramped apartment, the wind biting at my cheeks, I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't over, that Jason's sudden return was a crack in the peace I'd been chasing. Back home, I found a package waiting, an unexpected delivery with no return address, and inside was a small Lego set, a tiny Millennium Falcon, nothing extravagant, but enough to make my chest tighten. There was no note, but I knew it wasn't from my parents. They'd never think of me like that, not after everything. I sat on my threadbare couch, turning the box over in my hands, wondering if Jason had sent it as some kind of apology, or if it was someone else entirely, someone who'd noticed me pulling away from the world. The next day, Sarah called, her voice bright and oblivious, like she hadn't spent the last year living off my sacrifices. "Ash, oh my God, you won't believe it. I got an internship at this amazing company, all because of that research project. Mom and Dad are throwing a party to celebrate. You have to come." I listened, my grip tightening on the phone, her excitement a stark contrast to the quiet life I'd been carving out. And I realized she didn't even know I'd been expelled from that same college last time around, that she'd never asked how I was doing now. "Sure, I'll think about it," I lied, already knowing I wouldn't go because showing up would mean stepping back into their game, letting them pretend we were a happy family when I was just the shadow they cast aside. After hanging up, I started building the Millennium Falcon, piece by tiny piece. The familiar click of Lego bricks a soothing rhythm against the chaos of my thoughts. Jason's confession, Sarah's success, my parents' silence all swirling together. A week later, I ran into Mom at the grocery store, her cart loaded with party supplies, and she froze when she saw me, her eyes darting away like I was a stranger. "Ashley," she said, her voice tight. "You look, well." I nodded, keeping my expression neutral. "I'm managing." She hesitated, then added, "You should come to Sarah's party. It'd mean a lot to her." And I heard the unspoken plea, to play my role, to prop up their image. But I just said, "Maybe," and walked away, leaving her standing there with her streamers and cake mix. That night, Jason texted again, "I'm not giving up on us." And I stared at the message, the Millennium Falcon half built on my table, wondering if I'd ever truly escape the pull of my old life, or if this second chance was just a longer, slower fall. I didn't reply, but as I snapped another Lego piece into place, I felt a quiet resolve settling in. I wasn't done building yet. Not my model, not my life, and I'd be damned if I let them take this from me too. The days after running into Mom at the grocery store stretched into a strange, suspended silence. Sarah's party came and went without another word from my family. No follow-up call, no guilt trip, just the faint echo of their lives moving forward without me, a rhythm I'd grown used to in this second chance at existence. I didn't go, of course. I spent that evening finishing the Millennium Falcon, its sleek gray form taking shape under my hands as I ignored the buzz of my phone. Jason's persistent texts piling up, each one a plea to reconsider, to let him back in, to reclaim what I'd once fought for. But I left them unanswered, the tiny Lego ship my only company as I leaned into the peace I'd been cultivating, fragile as it was. My routine held steady. Classes, work, study, repeat. A grind that kept me afloat in my cramped apartment, where the rent was paid in crumpled bills from my coffee shop tips, and the fridge stayed mostly empty save for instant noodles and the occasional apple. I'd stopped expecting anything from my parents, their absence a kind of freedom, and I'd stopped chasing Jason's shadow too, his words in the diner, "You're better than her," ringing hollow now that I saw how little he'd understood my choice to let go. But the world has a way of tugging you back when you least expect it, and a week later, I got an email from my advisor. "Ashley, we need to discuss your academic standing. Meet me tomorrow." My stomach dropped. I'd been acing my classes, rebuilding my credits from scratch after the expulsion in my last life. So this couldn't be about grades. What else could they take from me now? The next day, I sat across from Dr. Patel in her cluttered office, her expression a mix of concern and something I couldn't quite place, and she slid a letter across the desk. "You've been flagged for academic misconduct. Someone's claiming your latest physics paper, the one you submitted last month, was plagiarized." I stared at the page, the words blurring as my mind raced back to that paper. Every equation, every late night spent perfecting it, all mine. And I knew instantly who was behind this. Sarah or my parents or both, because who else would bother? "That's impossible," I said, my voice steady despite the tremor in my chest. "I wrote every word myself." "Dr." Patel sighed. "I believe you, Ashley. Your work's been impeccable, but the complaint came with evidence, a draft from another student's project, and it's eerily similar. We have to investigate." I didn't need to ask who. Sarah's internship, her sudden success, my research project handed over so easily. It all clicked into place, a twisted encore of their old playbook. Only this time they weren't just taking what was mine. They were trying to erase me from the board entirely. I left the meeting with a hearing date set for next week and a warning to prepare a defense, my mind spinning as I walked across campus, the spring air sharp against my skin, and I wondered how far they'd go to keep Sarah shining, how deep their favoritism ran when it wasn't enough to lift her up. They had to bury me too. That night, Jason showed up at my door unannounced, his face flushed with urgency. "Ash, I heard what's happening. Sarah told me about the plagiarism thing. She's freaking out, saying you stole her work." I laughed, a raw, jagged sound, and let him in. Not because I wanted him there, but because I needed to hear how far the lie had spread. "She's saying I stole from her?" I asked, leaning against the counter as he paced my tiny kitchen. "Jason, I gave her my last project, willingly, and now she's claiming my new work too?" He stopped, running a hand through his hair. "I don't know what to believe, but she's got drafts, dates, stuff that looks legit. She showed me, and your parents are backing her up. They're saying you've always been jealous, that you'd do anything to sabotage her." The absurdity hit me like a punch, and I sank onto the couch, the Millennium Falcon gleaming on the table, a small anchor in the storm. Jealousy, they said. when I'd spent this life giving them everything, asking for nothing, and still they painted me as the villain. Jason sat beside me too close, his voice softening. I don't buy it, Ash. I know you. Let me help. Talk to them. Figure this out. I shook my head. No, Jason, this isn't your fight. I'm done begging them to see me. He reached for my hand, but I pulled away. The memory of his choice, Sarah over me, still a quiet scar, and I didn't trust him to stand by me now, not when he'd folded so easily before. After he left, I dug through my files, pulling every note, every draft of that physics paper, piecing together a defense that felt like armoring myself for a war I didn't want to fight, but I had to, because this time it wasn't just about losing something, it was about losing myself. The hearing loomed, and I spent sleepless nights preparing, my coffee shop shifts blurring into study sessions, my hands trembling as I typed, the weight of their betrayal heavier than ever, Sarah's smug Instagram posts from her internship popping up like taunts, Mom and Dad's silence a confirmation of their complicity. Then, 2 days before the hearing, a knock at my door jolted me from my work. It was Dr. Patel, her face grim, holding a folder. Ashley, I found something, she said, stepping inside. The draft Sarah submitted as hers. They're time-stamped from your college account, your old login, from before you were expelled last time. Someone accessed it, faked the evidence. My breath caught. Dad, the software engineer with his tricks and his reach, had struck again, and I realized this wasn't just Sarah's desperation. It was a family effort to keep her pedestal intact. Dr. Patel promised to present it at the hearing, but as she left, I felt no relief, only a cold clarity. They'd never stop, not until I was nothing, and even this second chance might not be enough to outrun them. I sat back down, staring at the Millennium Falcon, its tiny wings a fragile defiance, and wondered what it would take to finally break free, not just from their grip, but from the part of me that still hoped they'd change. The revelation from Dr. E. Patel about the faked timestamps hung over me like a storm cloud as the hearing approached, the weight of my family's sabotage sinking deeper into my bones, not just Sarah's greed or Dad's tech-savvy meddling, but Mom's silent complicity, all of them working in tandem to erase my existence while propping up their golden child, a pattern so ingrained it felt like breathing to them. I spent the next 2 days in a haze of preparation, my tiny apartment a fortress of scattered notes, laptop screens glowing with evidence, and the Millennium Falcon perched on the table, its quiet presence a lifeline as I pieced together every scrap of proof I had, drafts, timestamps, even old emails from my first life at college, anything to show that paper was mine, born from my mind and my hands alone. Sleep was a distant memory, replaced by black coffee and the hum of my own thoughts, a relentless drumbeat of anger and determination that drowned out the fear threatening to creep in. This wasn't just about clearing my name, it was about claiming the one thing they couldn't take, my truth. The hearing itself was a sterile affair. Held in a conference room with flickering fluorescent lights, Dr. Patel at my side, her folder of findings a shield against the accusing stares of the academic committee, while Sarah sat across from me, her face a mask of feigned innocence, flanked by Mom and Dad, their expressions a mix of stern resolve and thinly veiled panic. The committee chair, a gray-haired professor with a voice like gravel, read the charges aloud. Plagiarism, academic dishonesty, a stain on my record that could end my second chance before it truly began. And I felt Sarah's eyes on me, not triumphant but nervous, like she knew the house of cards she'd built was teetering. Dr. Patel presented her evidence first, her tone calm and precise as she explained the timestamp discrepancies, the access logs tying the fake drafts to my old account, hacked long after I'd lost it, and I watched Dad's jaw tighten, his fingers twitching like he wanted to argue but couldn't. Not yet. Then it was my turn, and I stood, my voice steady despite the tremor in my hands, walking them through every step of my paper's creation, showing my notes, my late-night scribbles, the evolution of my ideas, laying bare the work I'd poured myself into while my family celebrated Sarah's stolen victories. Sarah's defense came next, her voice trembling as she clung to her story, claiming she'd written the original draft, that I'd stolen it out of spite. And Mom backed her up, her words sharp and rehearsed. Ashley's always been jealous. She can't stand to see her sister succeed. While Dad chimed in with technical jargon, trying to muddy the waters about the account breach. Though his confidence faltered under Dr. Patel's scrutiny, the committee deliberated for an agonizing hour, leaving us in a tense silence broken only by Sarah's occasional sniffle, crocodile tears, I thought bitterly. And when they returned, the chair's verdict was clear. The evidence supports Ms. Ashley's claim. The plagiarism charge is dismissed. However, due to the breach of her account, we'll be launching a separate investigation into campus security. Relief crashed over me, but it was short-lived. Sarah burst into sobs, Mom glaring at me like I'd betrayed them, and Dad muttering about appealing, their fury a palpable thing, as if I'd wronged them by proving my innocence. I left the room with Dr. Patel, her hand on my shoulder a rare gesture of warmth. But outside, Jason was waiting, his face a storm of guilt and frustration. Ash, I tried to talk to them. Sarah admitted it was Dad's idea, but she went along with it. I'm so sorry. I nodded, too drained to respond, and brushed past him, needing space to process. Not just the victory, but the cost. The confirmation that my family would rather destroy me than let me stand on my own. Back at my apartment, I collapsed on the couch, the Millennium Falcon staring back at me, and for the first time in days, I let myself cry. Not out of sadness, but exhaustion. A release of the tension I'd carried since waking up at 17 in this reborn life. The next morning, my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Mom, her voice cold and clipped. Ashley, we're cutting you off completely. No more chances, no more help. You've made your choice. I deleted it without a second thought. The finality of her words a strange relief, like a chain snapping free, though I knew it wasn't over. They'd find another way to pull me back. Their need to control too deep to let go entirely. At work that afternoon, my coffee shop manager slipped me an extra $20. For whatever you're going through, she said, and I pocketed it with a faint smile. The kindness a small balm against the war I'd just fought. Later, I sat down to study, but my eyes kept drifting to the Lego ship, and I wondered if I could build something bigger. Not just a model, but a life truly mine, beyond their reach. Then, a knock at the door startled me. It was Sarah, alone. Her eyes red-rimmed and her posture slumped. Ash, I need to talk, she said, her voice raw, and I froze, caught between shutting her out and hearing her out, because for once she didn't look like the untouchable sister I'd always known. She stepped inside before I could decide, clutching a crumpled letter. They're kicking me out of the internship. Someone tipped them off about the hearing, and now they know the project wasn't mine. I stared at her, the irony thick between us. She'd lost what she'd stolen, and now she was here, in my space, expecting what? Sympathy? Forgiveness? I didn't mean for it to go this far, she whispered, tears spilling over. Dad pushed me, and I just wanted to win for once. I didn't move, didn't soften, my voice low as I replied, You've been winning my whole life, Sarah. What's left to take? She flinched, and for a moment I saw something break in her, a crack in the facade she'd worn so effortlessly. But I wasn't sure if it was real or just another play. And as she stood there waiting for me to fix it, I realized I didn't owe her that. Not anymore. The room grew quiet, the weight of our history pressing down, and I knew this moment would shift something. Whether toward reconciliation or a deeper rift, I couldn't tell yet. But I wasn't ready to let it end here, not when I just started fighting for myself. Sarah stood in my apartment, her crumpled letter trembling in her hands, her confession hanging heavy between us. I didn't mean for it to go this far. And for a moment, I almost believed her, the raw edge in her voice slicing through years of her polished entitlement. But I'd heard too many apologies from my family that turned to ash, too many promises that crumbled under their selfishness. So I stayed silent, letting her words fall into the void I'd built around myself. She sank onto my couch, uninvited, her tears staining the threadbare cushion as she rambled on about Dad's pressure, Mom's expectations, the internship she'd lost because of an anonymous tip, likely Dr. Patel, or someone else who'd seen through her lies at the hearing, and I watched her, detached, the Millennium Falcon on the table a silent witness to this unraveling I hadn't asked for. Ash, I'm sorry, she choked out, looking up at me with eyes that mirrored mine but carried none of my scars. I know I've taken everything, but I didn't see it, not really, until now. Can't we fix this? Her plea stirred something in me, not softness, but a flicker of exhaustion, a weariness from carrying their burdens in both lives. And I replied, Fix what, Sarah? You've got Mom and Dad, the life they built for you. What's left to fix with me? She flinched again, her hands twisting the letter into a tighter ball, and whispered, I don't have them anymore. They're furious I lost the internship. They blame me for the hearing, for dragging the family name through this. The irony was almost laughable. Their perfect daughter finally tasting the rejection I'd lived with forever. But I didn't laugh. I just stared, wondering if this was her breaking or her regrouping. Another act to pull me back into their orbit. Before I could respond, my phone buzzed. Jason, again, with a text. Sarah's missing, your parents are freaking out. Where is she? I glanced at her sitting there, not missing at all, and realized she'd run to me instead of them, a twist I hadn't seen coming, and I texted back. She's here, because whatever this was, I wouldn't lie to protect her anymore. Minutes later, the door burst open, Mom and Dad storming in, their faces a mix of rage and relief, Mom's voice cutting first. Sarah, how dare you come here after what you've done? And Dad's glare landing on me. Ashley, what are you playing at, keeping her here? I stepped back, hands raised. I didn't ask her to come, she showed up. But they didn't hear me, their focus zeroing on Sarah as Mom grabbed her arm, yanking her up. You've humiliated us enough, let's go. Sarah resisted, pulling free, her voice rising. No, I'm done with you both. I told Ashley the truth, and I'm not going back to your lies. The room froze, a rare crack in their united front, and for a fleeting second, I thought I saw fear in Dad's eyes, a man who'd controlled us all unraveling before this defiance he couldn't script. Mom turned on me then, her fury ablade. This is your fault. You turned her against us with your stunt at that hearing. And Dad added, "You've always been spiteful, Ashley, tearing this family apart." Their accusations a warped mirror of the truth, but I didn't argue. I was too tired, too hollowed out by their endless blame. Sarah shouted over them, "Stop it! She didn't do anything, it was me, it was you!" And the chaos spiraled, voices overlapping, years of resentment boiling over until Dad lunged for Sarah, trying to drag her out, and she shoved him back hard, sending him stumbling into the table where the Millennium Falcon sat. Time slowed as the Lego ship toppled, crashing to the floor in a plastic shatter that echoed my first life's fall from that building. And I watched, numb, as the pieces scattered, months of quiet solace undone in an instant, just like everything else they touched. Sarah gasped, "Ash, I'm sorry." But I didn't look at her. My eyes were on Mom, who sneered, "It's just a toy, stop being dramatic." And Dad, regaining his footing, barked, "Enough, we're leaving, both of you now." I shook my head. "I'm not going anywhere." My voice a quiet steel I hadn't known I still had. And Sarah hesitated, caught between us, her rebellion faltering as Mom's grip tightened on her again. They dragged her out, her protest fading down the hall, and I was left alone with the wreckage, Lego pieces strewn across the floor, my phone buzzing with Jason's unanswered calls, and a silence that felt heavier than ever. I sank to my knees, gathering the broken bits of the Millennium Falcon, each click of plastic a stab of memory, building it, losing it, rebuilding myself only to watch it fall again. And I realized this second chance wasn't a gift, but a curse, a loop of loss I couldn't escape, no matter how hard I tried. Days blurred into nights, my routine crumbling as I stopped going to classes, stopped working, stopped answering Dr. O. Patel's concerned emails. The hearing victory felt meaningless now, a hollow triumph against a family that would never let me win. One evening, as rain lashed the windows, I climbed to the roof of my apartment building, the same height as that fatal fall in my first life, the wind howling like it had back then, and I stood at the edge, the scattered Lego pieces still vivid in my mind, my defiance, my peace, my failure. I'd given up everything, scholarships, projects, Jason, my family, hoping to find myself, but all I'd found was this, a void they'd carved out and left me to drown in. Sarah's last look, torn and pleading, flashed before me, and I wondered if she'd break free or sink back into their grasp. But it didn't matter anymore. I couldn't save her, couldn't save myself. The city lights blurred below, and with a final breath, I stepped off. The fall a mirror of my first death, only this time I chose it. A tragic end to a second chance that promised freedom, but delivered only echoes of the same old chains. The Millennium Falcon's wreckage, the last thing I saw as the darkness swallowed me whole.